This is the first episode of the podcast. I'm here today with Mikela Fenech Pace, who is actually a member of our team at Shireburn, and we've worked on a lot of different projects together, not only at Shireburn, but also in training and supporting organizations out there in a real wide variety of different fields. So the aim of today's conversation is to really give you a window into what our philosophy is on HR, what are the challenges out there, and how can we go beyond just paying lip service to HR, going beyond just everyone saying, yes, HR is important, but to actually taking that desire to have HR as an important aspect of our work and translate that into what that means on the ground. How can we actually create organizations that would make us proud, that actually mirror and match our vision for HR? Because I feel like a lot of us really have beautiful goals for the cultures we want to create, but then the reality of making that work on the ground, we often bump into quite a few different obstacles. So thank you so much for tuning in and listening to this conversation, and it's going to be the first of many more all around our passion for people. Obviously, I know you very well, you know me. Maybe we'll just start for those who don't know us and just give a little bit of a background and what brought you here today with this huge passion for HR and organizational change.
Okay, so thanks, Yaz, for having me. As you said, we're passionate about people, passionate about cultures, and also passionate about this relationship that we've discovered. Although I'm much older than you, I have to say, but a relationship that really brings together the best of software, but not that, just the mind and also the deepest of what people have to offer. So really bringing out what the best in people rather than fitting them into a mold, which is what organizations have done for so long. Something about myself, well, not many people probably know, but I was raised as a diplomat. So that was my first passion, still remains till today. Spent 15 years working with government as a diplomat. Loved it, still have a great passion, a huge respect for the public sector, and moved on then into the private sector. That was the first kind of big shift. Never thought I would do it, but I did. And fell into HR quite accidentally because a friend of mine needed help to project manage an HR department. And I thought, how hard can that be? Turned out it was a big challenge, but it was also a fun challenge to actually take a department that had, in a sense, crumbled and rebuild it. I was very, very fortunate to be working with people I really enjoyed working with, but also within an organization that had a huge knowledge of the industry, and not only, but the HR research and development. So really up there, it was an international company, and that's where I could say my passion started. I never thought it was a science. I never thought it was, rocket science, but actually it is a very important part of every business, and probably a part that we don't give enough attention to. Subsequently, I then had another HR job with blue-collar workers, this time mostly, which was incredibly interesting because it was the first time I was working with that percentage of blue-collar workers. Gives you an insight into what makes people happy. Believe it or not, sometimes the less you earn, the more clarity you have on what makes you happy and what gives you most satisfaction in life. So that taught me many a lesson, sometimes more than I wanted to, but most important there was it gave me one very important lesson, which is what I could do rather than what other people have done. So it really made me look and pull a mirror up to myself and understand my responsibilities and my role in an organizational culture as an HR manager, rather than complaining about what the organization is not doing and how I can be more effective as an HR individual. So that really shifted, and that's when I met you. So when I went into coaching, started a coaching course, that was the first entry into education in that space. Specifically chose a coaching course because I recognized the fact that if I didn't do the work myself as an individual, I couldn't understand the people I was serving. And the rest is history. So I got involved with you. Had a lot to do with your entry into Shireburn and our vision together of pulling a payroll company into the HR space with a different twist from culture. So, of course, the HR space had already been introduced, but really showcasing the great work the developers do at Sherburn and giving it the human touch.
I like what you said. You kind of touched on this thing of, like, we think that HR isn't rocket science, but actually when you get onto the ground of HR, humans are the most complex thing to manage in any organization. If we were just kind of safe with machines and things that didn't involve any humans, actually things can be a lot simpler. Yet it is within the human that there is so much potential for creativity that even with all of the discussions about AI and so on, we still can't match the human ability for creativity, for compassion, for care, and adaptability. So I'm very curious about that, I think, because I have this kind of pet peeve around HR. Like the last few years have seen the importance of HR being elevated because of COVID, because obviously, people issues really became key to whether organizations could keep running and how effective they would be. But at the same time, I feel like we've emerged from COVID not having really taken the full benefit of understanding just how important people are. I feel like a lot of the time, organizations pay lip service to HR and they want to feel like they're doing something for their people. But it's often very superficial things like, okay, we have fruit baskets being delivered. I hate the fruit basket thing. Because for me, it's just a real sign of like, okay, we want to do something, but we're not really addressing whether people are happy at work. And yes, humans are complex, so creating an environment that makes everyone happy is actually quite an enormous task. Perhaps we joke at Sherburn that happy is impossible, but happier is always possible, right? So we're sort of striving to make cultures better because perfection is forever elusive. But this thing about really wanting to change HR. Yes, we all know, especially when you bring HR professionals together, we all know that people are important. But it feels to me like there's a gap between knowing people are important and then actually being able to create change within an organization to make it happier. And I just want to caveat this happier phrase that I'm using because for me, happiness is the new productivity. It's not just about making individuals happy and not making the organization itself a more effective organization. So I want to couch that. But again, I feel like people at their happiest are the most efficient, are the most creative, and can deliver the most to an organization. So what are your thoughts of this? Like, is there still a way to go between the lip service that is often paid to HR and the real commitment to changing organizational structures?
Okay, so that's a big mouthful, and there are lots of things that I want to say. So I'll just get down to it. To begin with, happiness. I was always really quite intrigued at, when I was younger, when I was 18, I traveled to Albania with my aunt and my cousin. We traveled overland. And in the middle of a mountainous village where they had absolutely nothing, this was just after the fall of communism, they were happy kids. And I took countless photos. I have albums full of these beautiful kids. And they were happy. Their smiles said it all. They had nothing. And when I look around me today, I say it with a bit of sadness because in a way, when you have so little, you're so happy with so little. And yet we have so much. And when I look at those smiles, I say, but where is the smile in our offices? When we lecture and we train, you and I always speak about body language, and the smile is the most impactful part. It speaks. And a smile can speak a million words. It's your most expressive part of your body. Yet how many times do we smile in an office? Where is the smile? And so I like to look at HR as bringing back the smile. And life is very, very connected. And again, we discuss this a lot, but we're very disconnected. And we're disconnected because we're so connected to our phones, we're so connected to our computers, we have to rush with that next email. We don't really have much time to sit around the coffee machine anymore. What I love about Sherburn is it's the knowledge and the trust that members of staff are given to know where their limits are on their own. And this is probably the crux of Maltese businesses, is you still see it till today when we discuss, for example, hybrid solutions, when we discuss people coming back home from, wanting to work at home and coming back into the office. To be honest, it should be a no-brainer to come back into the office. Of course, it's very comfortable to get up and sit at your computer, but you're not exposed to anything new. You're not having a discussion. You're not having a random conversation. You're not listening to other people speak, which means you're learning. And you're not communicating with people face to face.
Can I butt in for a second?
For sure.
As you were speaking about this, where is the smile? And beyond organizations, right? Like, back to that thing of when you have nothing, you're happy, and we have so much. Yet as a society, we have a lot of issues with anxiety, depression, and so on. That is sort of a red flag that, hey, something is wrong. And as you were speaking, for me, it's community, right? Like, we have become isolated from each other. And without going into a whole kind of deconstruction of why that is on a societal level, if we take that same principle into organizations, that we as human beings are suffering from isolation and a lack of connection. And actually it is in connection and relationship that we are at our happiest. Two things. One, studies have shown that the most accurate predictor of how long you will live is not your diet, it's not whether you smoke, it's not genetics, it's the number and depth of your close relationships.
So I can go back to smoking again?
No. Well, it's up to you, as long as you have good community around you. And the second thing I want to mention is recently I saw these really interesting graphs where they chart the amount of time that you spend with close family, partner, children, and colleagues. And basically for the chunk of your life, the majority of your time is spent with your colleagues. So the culture and the community that you develop at work is not only crucial to the organization, but it's also crucial to how happy your kind of majority of your life is going to be. So for me, like, that's really a good starting point to start this discussion of, like, how do we make our organizations better communities and better connection at the workplace, human to human.
Now that's rocket science. So I say, previously when we were discussing before the podcast started, you said, we have a passion for people. And unfortunately, when you work in HR, that passion for people very often becomes, dwindles, because it's so difficult to work with people. It's really, really tough. It's hard work, because what you're doing is you're absorbing their stress. You're absorbing their anxiety, especially today. And, very often I turn to my husband and I say, in 2023, 2024 now coming up, I'm not sure I haven't the skill set to be a good parent. And I can relate this also to HR. Do we have the necessary skill set to deal with the challenges the market has to offer today? Times have changed, people have changed. They bring their anxiety into the office. My father used to say, you leave your work at work and your home life at home. Today, that is impossible. It's impossible. When someone walks in, you know exactly the stresses, the difficulties at home, the challenges with children, the challenges with aging parents, and the lack of community, the lack of support that people have. How many times have people come into your office and into my office and they're alone and they ask for help? Too many times to count. And this is what possibly the HR department has a role to play, but does not necessarily have the right skill set. We see this happening also with teachers, for example. You see the same thing happening with teachers. How are we going to develop the skill set to be able to assist? And I think this is the crux is, let's not expect us to be superhuman. HR professionals are not superhuman. It's nearly impossible to develop the full range of skill set. Where do we start from? Building good teams that are able to be supportive, but more importantly, building good cultures. And building good cultures where every single manager is plugged in to the same vision of creating a good culture, creating a safe culture.
Yeah, I'd love to just, as I always resonate when you talk about the challenges that HR professionals face. And I'd love to just for you to expand a little bit deeper on this, because you've often asked the question, and we've discussed this many times, who's looking after the HR professional? And many HR people are givers, they're very people-oriented, so they really do go above and beyond often to take care of the people within their organization. But we see a lot of burnout within HR professionals as well, and a real lack of support and a lack of supporting them to get the skill set and the support that they need to actually run an HR department effectively. Before we can even talk about, okay, how do we make our culture better? Many HR professionals are really in sort of survival mode, really.
Well, they're in survival mode because they get burnt so often. And by burnt, I don't mean burnout. By burnt, I mean any decision that is taken in HR is generally a very difficult decision. So the right decisions in HR are not necessarily the easiest decisions to take. Let me give you a scenario. You have a member of staff that is generally toxic, for example. In sales, this happens quite often. It's quite interesting. In sales, you generally find type A personalities which are driven. They're driven for commissions. They're driven for money. You need them on your team to be able to make that sale. But what happens is they become blinded by the focus and the drive towards the commission and forget the rest. And they become important to the company, and the company becomes dependent on that sale, which means the bad behavior is not kept in check because we don't have those difficult conversations. And if the difficult conversations are not had from day one, they're going to spiral. And all of a sudden you create a culture of, oh, that individual can just get away with it. And this happens all the time. And I always say there is a sense of when the pendulum shifts, I like to use the seesaw. So when a member of staff drops the seesaw to the point that they impact the rest of the staff, they could be the best member of staff, the most lucrative, the most impactful salesperson to your bottom line, but then the person has to go. And not many people are ready to have those discussions or to entertain them.
I think not many people realize as well how many other people in your organization leave because there is an untouchable or a person that's toxic that they know might potentially be there for the next decade.
The problem is trust, because if the organization on the one hand is preaching and has an employee handbook and is preaching certain values, but then makes exceptions because an individual is very valuable, because it's too difficult to have that conversation, because there's a political reason behind the scenes. All these things happen in all organizations. And I get it. It's very, 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 very difficult. It's very difficult to take that decision. But that's why we have leaders, because leaders need to take difficult decisions.
But very often HR is not in that position where they're actually empowered to be able to take that decision. So they make recommendations and they know, this is again something you've spoken about a lot, that HR professionals can generally tell where the problems are, where the pain points are, who are those people that are making everyone else's life more difficult. But one of the reasons that they get banned is that then there isn't the real commitment to creating like that. The commitment to the culture being good comes into this conflict with, oh, they're my best salesperson. And then, leaders and organizations don't often stick behind HR and actually trust them to make that decision.
So there are many things that go on. There's, to begin with, shame. How didn't I notice? Denial. There's a lot of denial when it comes to issues to do with HR. There's a big responsibility in HR, as I've realized only in recent years. What is the role of HR when bringing these issues to the fore? This is like a teacher tells a mother, your child has developmental problems. The first reaction with most mothers is going to be, no, my child does not. My child is perfect. So our first reaction is always, no, defense. We do it. We work with lots of people to crack and to, break down the defensive mechanisms. But that's our first reaction. So I get it. When I was in HR on the front line, I didn't get it. And that was my biggest mistake. So I didn't get that it took people time to process what I already knew. I was already on Z, and I possibly didn't give enough time to take people through the process. And so my advice always to HR people is trust the process, but manage the process. One individual at a time, one leader at a time. Build a case. What I love about Shaiben's new products, especially insights, is this. It's exactly this. Is that it gives you insights. It gives you red flags. It speaks the language that CEOs and financial controllers understand. It speaks numbers. And therefore, if I have a toxic member of staff, the numbers are going to show up. It's a question of understanding the numbers and being able to evidence them.
So you're saying sort of the best solution is to empower So you're saying the best solution is to empower HR professionals to be able to elevate these issues in a more effective way. But if they are sort of getting tired and getting burnt out and they're sort of stuck in this loop of helping and caring and trying to make change, but maybe feeling frustrated at the rate of change. Like, I don't know, for me, that is one of the bleeding causes of burnout. I don't know if you would
It's
add.
It's emotional. So let me give you an example. And this happens all the time in HR. Someone comes to your office and they have a complaint. They vomit. You absorb that energy because you're empathic. You know, I call it the Mother Teresa syndrome. You want to help. Most HR managers have this skill, personality. You can't be an HR manager if you don't have the personality to help, to understand, to have empathy. And sometimes we take it a little bit too far. So most HR managers, myself included, have a deep desire to be liked, to be needed, to be valued. And this is where it comes from. And
we all have this.
Well, we all have it, but you know, in what it does is it feeds that need, that people actually need you. So they come to you, they need you, and you're on high alert. You absorb everything they're telling you and take it as fact. So that's point number one. How can we train HR managers to be able to be objective and create boundaries even whilst being empathic? So you can do that, but it takes training, one. Secondly, what we don't realize as HR professionals is that when people come and dump, this is like when you go to confession. You go, you tell the priest, and you feel relieved. You know, it's when we were younger. This is what they do. They come, they offload, they walk out, they feel much lighter, and you're stuck with solving a situation. Now, too many times do you try and solve the situation immediately. Your instinct, because if someone walks in and they're in pain, and generally these are the toughest of conversations, they're in pain. You want to solve that situation. And that's where a lack of objectivity, a lack of training, a lack of wisdom comes in.
And self-awareness.
And self-awareness. Am I projecting my feelings onto the situation? Am I making it larger than it should be? Am I acting on impulse?
And am I also just too uncomfortable with a painful situation? Like, I find that's something that happens very often, that there is a painful situation, you just want to fix it just because you can't bear the complexity or the paradox that is that living moment.
No, I mean, pain, one has to decode, but we don't have the skill set. I never had the skill set to be able to decode. And so you go home and you're thinking about it. You wake up the next morning and you're thinking about it. An email might trigger it. Then you're like, oh God, you feel this need to quickly solve the situation. When actually in those situations, the most important thing is actually to slow down. Because believe it or not, 80% of the situations that I've handled, had I slowed down, had I not taken some decisions, the chances are they would have resolved themselves. Or we would have resolved them in a different way, with a little less drama. So one gets caught up in our drama triangle.
Yeah.
You know, so for those that know about the drama triangle, you know, you're in the persecutor, the rescuer, and there's another one, I forgot at the moment. But you want to always rescue. And when you rescue, you fall into a loop. And so this is what we've always worked at, and what you and I do with HR managers and even in training is, how can we be helpful without taking the responsibility on ourselves?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's twofold, right? Like, there's what you're saying is kind of speaking to the agency that HR professionals have to deal better with the stresses and look at their self-awareness, drop some attachments, look at their own scripts, their own patterns, so that they don't fall into patterns which can lead to a lot of emotional frustration. And I mean, let's talk about that more because it's super beautiful. But at the same time, I don't want to let organizational leaders off the hook either, because I think there is a piece that sometimes as CEOs, as COOs, as leaders of organizations, we just shy away from doing the hard thing. And sometimes the hard thing is saying, you know, this person is toxic and is creating problems for my organization, but I'm attached to them and I know that there's going to be some pain around dealing with them. So I feel like I also want to bring in that piece, because it's never just one-sided, right? And again, like, I'm totally for supporting HR professionals, and we're both really committed to this, and I love this work. And I think it's such a beautiful thing to be able to, through your profession, grow personally. I'm a big believer in that, and in HR you have so many of those opportunities. But also, like, how do we make our organizations braver? Because I do feel like HR alone can't create a good culture. Like, there is some support needed from leaders of organizations to say, hold on, this is the kind of culture that I want to create, and I'm not going to just put it in a vision statement and put it in the handbook. But every time there's one of these difficult situations, I have the chance to actually show myself and my leadership team and the entire organizations that I really believe this.
So to begin with, it's to become less judgmental. That's the first. I get it, and I'm not trying in any way to denigrate or to lessen the responsibility of CEOs and the responsibility of senior leadership teams. Far from it. If they knew how to do it, they would. And it's key. The truth is, most leadership teams that I've worked with, most leadership teams that you've worked with, apart from yourself, so that's obviously different, but you've done the work and you
but I mean, I see this even in myself. Like, I still get moments where certain decisions are really hard to take. And, you know, you can see a person within your organization who's maybe struggling in the role or not a fit for the culture of the team. And it is really hard to just say, okay, then, you know, especially me, because I'm a real big believer in second chances and supporting people to grow. But ultimately, if you're really committed to the good of your organization, you do have to have tough conversations and take difficult decisions. And especially this happens a lot in organizations, right? I was an entrepreneur and I founded my own business. I never had a class that taught me how to have difficult conversations, how to fire people, how to really do these very difficult things. So many people end up in leadership of organizations, not because they're good at leadership, but because they're good at the technical skills required of that organization. And then they get promoted. So again, like, even me with all of my background in self-development, the countless hours I've spent meditating and doing different work on myself, I still get into moments where I struggle and I have to really sort of make an effort to do the right thing. So I want to put a spotlight on this, not to blame, but to just also, like, if we're going to change culture, then we need to be really honest about where we struggle and where we're not living up to the values that we ourselves want to, because most people want to create these good cultures. They don't wake up in the morning and say, oh, I want to create a culture that doesn't care, right?
Yeah, but it's very difficult. So we forget that to run a marathon, you spend hours and hours every single day practicing and training. You know, if you're in theater, you spend hours and hours every single day training. And really, when you're a leader, there's a lot of training to do. And training is very uncomfortable because it's very lonely. So leadership is lonely. Ask any leader and they will tell you that leadership is a very, very lonely space. Because when the buck stops with you, then it really stops with you. And the decision needs to be taken. And therefore they take decisions every single day, and they take a lot of decisions every single day. And people decisions are the most difficult. And they are the most difficult because they have an impact on a human. But what we don't realize is that if we do not take these difficult decisions, if we do not have these difficult conversations, we are doing no justice to the human in front of us. If I don't give you feedback, if I don't tell you, you know what, Yaz, this is not the job for you, then I'm not giving you the opportunity to excel in something that you may be good at. And what I'm doing is I'm just fueling and enabling an illusion.
I mean, growth is painful, right? Like, that's like
Definitely.
the cliche thing of the self-development world is like, you have to get buried to be planted. So there is this painful growth that needs to happen. And I feel like the self-development work needs to happen on both levels, right? The HR professionals who, yes, they're responsible for their own, you know, patterns that can lead them to having, you know, boundary issues, and also just taking things really to heart and maybe getting frustrated with the lack of pace of change within their organization. But then we also need to do the self-development work as leaders, as CEOs, as COOs, to really make that jump between, yes, I want to have a good culture, and yes, I'm going to put this budget into doing a team building once a year, and I'm going to get the fruit baskets, and I might even get someone in to teach meditation. But all of that, if you have a toxic person within your organization and you're not changing it, actually means very little. So how do we also support ourselves as leaders? And I think HR actually even have a role to play in this, right? In actually bringing this potential for training into organizations. Even we were doing a training last week for an organization, and we did a really challenging exercise, a self-development exercise. And I was so happy because the leader, the CEO, actually joined into the exercise and made herself vulnerable. And I could really recognize how hard that is, right? Because leaders of organizations it's lonely at the top, but it can also be very safe at the top, right? That you don't need to make yourself vulnerable. Ultimately, the buck stops with you, but you're also not being told off. You're not being necessarily like really kind of scrutinized for the way that you show up and the emotional patterns you're bringing to work. So it's a bit like a therapist with a client, right? Like therapists are very used to always saying safe, right? Like they're the one here, they're asking you the questions. They're the ones that like they're asking you to be vulnerable, but they are actually quite safe. And I know a lot of therapists, again, not all, because there are some beautiful therapists who are super vulnerable, but who find it very difficult then to be vulnerable in their relationships. And in fact, this is why therapists have to have mentors and have to do therapy themselves, because it's really important to train ourselves to also be in a position of vulnerability. And as a CEO, as senior leadership, it can actually be very easy to fall into that trap of never having to be vulnerable yourself and do the work yourself.
I mean, at its core, so what you're saying is beautiful, it's perfect, but at its core, practical. If I was an HR manager, I'd turn to you and say, okay, so how's that going to help me in my day-to-day? That's the truth. You know, the slog of, I always say, in HR, you need something very strong in the morning, and by midday, you need something stronger. I think the only profession that competes with that is teachers. They need one every hour, something strong.
This is not a recommendation for teachers to drink on the job.
On parent, no, I didn't necessarily speak about drink. But the truth is, you do find yourself, you know, in difficult situations and firefighting all the time when you're dealing with people, absorbing their stress, recognizing difficult situations. There is an expectation that you solve people's problems for them. And there is also an expectation that when there is a difficult people problem, it's the HR department that will handle it. And the HR department creates a level and a veneer of safety for the leadership team not to handle it. It's easier. And I don't blame them. I really don't blame them for it. Does that lead to good cultures? No. So how can, you know, I can sit here and say, oh, the CEO should do this and the leadership team should do that. But I know what a challenge it is, because you're dealing also with your bottom line, you're dealing with your sales team. And at the end of the day, you need to drive your numbers. It needs to impact your bottom line. So in that respect, people issues become a very big distraction. If you speak to managers, they will say, oh my God, you know, before I used to do the job, now I spend 80% of my time dealing with people issues. And I do not know necessarily how to deal with them. And really, when I say it's not rocket science, it's not rocket science, because to understand people is not difficult. But we get it wrong because we're not ready to do the work. Let me give you an example, very, very practical example. So to what extent are we going to be able to rein in our staff, to call them out when they need to be called out in a safe space, not to ignore? How many times are we in meetings? How many times do people come to us and say, oh, do you know, my member of staff was very rude to me in a meeting. I said, okay, yes. And you did what? Oh, I got up and left the room. And that's going to achieve what? The individual doesn't know he's been rude to you. You just left the room. You haven't handled it. It's going to happen again. So because we do not have sometimes the skill set or the predisposition to deal with a problem there and then, and we ignore it, then it grows. And all of a sudden it becomes a script until it becomes explosive. So we need to look at things in a completely different way. How can HR develop a skill set to be able to take it one at a time and work hand in hand with leadership to assist leadership in this difficult process?
I mean, for me, I don't know, maybe I'm a bit of a self-development geek, but for me, when you do any kind of work to make yourself a more aware person, it's going to help your work and it's going to help your personal life. So for me, I see it like, okay, as a CEO, and it's funny because my grandfather always used to tell this to my mother, that when you're in management, you don't work 9 to 5. You don't work Monday to Friday, but you spend all weekend preparing for your next week at work. And even though, that's a very old school way of looking at it, and I don't advocate for people spending their entire weekends thinking about work, for me, I've found this kind of harmony between the part of myself that really likes to grow and develop as a human being and how that feeds back into my work. So it also doesn't need to be a burden that we have to become more aware and we have to do all of this leadership work and we have to train ourselves to deal with people, because ultimately, if you're in a relationship, you're dealing with another human being and their emotions and their needs. If you're parenting, you're doing the same thing, right? In any sort of human sphere, you are dealing with people. So any skills that you can accumulate along the way, for me, I see it as a beautiful thing, right? For me, it's almost like a hobby, developing myself as a person, whether that's through going on retreats, whether that's through, the hard situation that I have to deal with at work. I feel like we also just need to change our perspective as humanity, because we came from a work situation where you work 9 to 5, you leave everything, you can't take your computer home with you. We had no smartphones. Work was a very... It was a black
generation,
box.
we used to send faxes.
Yes.
And letters.
But you know what I mean? It was like your work kind of stayed at work. Whereas now, as you said, that gap and that amalgamation of our personal lives and our work lives, in a way, creates an issue, because we're never turning off. We have now, all of these questions about whether your boss should be able to contact you outside of work hours. We have all of the struggles that come from the blurring of those lines, but I also see a huge potential as well, because your work and the leadership development that you do at the workplace can help you have better relationships, it can help you parent better, it can help you deal with challenges that inevitably come up along the way, even in our friendships and our relationships with our parents. And also then that also all of the work that we're doing outside of work to become a better human being, even if it's running a marathon, and the wisdom that is gained through spending all of those hours training can feed back into our organization. So it's funny, like I'm just thinking back to when I first got into eating more healthy. In the beginning, I thought, oh my God, healthy eating, how boring. All I had in my mind was this perception of low-fat
Your
yogurt.
diet is quite boring.
No, it's not. Separate podcast there. But I had this idea of healthy eating being something really boring and something that's very constrictive and a burden. Whereas then when I really got into it, actually I discovered, so many foods that I had never heard of and superfoods. And then there was travel for eating and, it opened up this whole new world. And it's a bit the same with self-development, right? Like if you haven't really got any experience of self-development, it can be something that seems like boring and something as a burden and, oh my God, I have to do that leadership training. But actually, when you really look into it and open it up, there are so many things within that world that touch on what it means to be a human being, what it means to be happy, what it means to be able to control your mind, what it means to have healthy relationships, all of these things which are just actually make our lives as human beings so much richer. So in a way, I feel like I'm trying to give a pep talk for any leaders out there to not view self-development as a negative thing, but really as an opportunity. And if you are in leadership within an organization, like it's a real call to adventure, I feel, to actually making not only your work life feel much more fulfilling and satisfying, but a whole key to who you are as a human being.
I mean, in all honesty, so I like leadership also because I like to break it down. So when you break down leadership, my take is everyone is a leader. I like to use this the expression, we have a bit of a sickness for our business card. We love titles. It's like titles make us who we are. And I don't reject titles, far from it. I see their use and I see that they are important and it is an important part of an organization. However, I like, especially in leadership training and when we do leadership training with you especially, and in HR training, is how can we give HR professionals and leaders the skill set to be able to tackle the day-to-day. And that is scary. It's scary because I always say our sessions and our talks are always very, very relational. So if I'm in touch with my mistakes and with my failures, and God knows there have been many, then I'm able to identify them in someone else and able to help that process. because at the end of the day, we speak about humans, but we forget we're human too. And, you asked me at the beginning of this podcast, who looks after the HR manager? Who looks after the HR professional? The truth is, the HR, who looks after the mother? The caring professions and the people that are giving so much of themselves and empathizing, they very often forget that someone needs to look after them. They don't reach out for help. So in people's minds, you look at them and say, they can cope. But are they really coping? Are they creating the right environment for them to be able to work at their best? And when we look at working with HR professionals, we look at two things necessarily. Okay, there's the administrative side, which is the practical, strategic side, and that's very practical. You can read a book and get it off a book. And then the second is the space that you create for yourself as an individual to keep sane when you're working within the sphere of HR, because there are going to be a lot of challenging situations, which may be obvious to you, but you are not necessarily obvious to everybody else around you. And you're dealing with people. And sometimes people do crazy things. And sometimes people do things that hurt you. Sometimes people's defense mechanisms go contrary to what they've said 5 minutes ago in your office. And they throw you under the bus. And that happens often, How not to take that personally. How to survive that. How to nourish yourself enough to be able to take that hit. And then the individual side. How are we going to empower HR managers and give them the necessary toolkit to do their job in the most impactful way possible? How are they going to take something that they know? How are they going to identify problematic employees and make a case for their dismissal, which will not end up with them being thrown under the bus? How's that process going to be managed? And that is very, very, very much related to the individual, to the personality of the individual. And in most cases, there's a process to go through because, as I said, when you're in a profession like HR, you necessarily are predisposed to having more empathy, a higher level of human need. And that exposes you to more hurt. And that is where the burnout comes. Yeah. How many times are you going to sit in a meeting and be dismissed? You're not being dismissed because you're not important necessarily, but you're being dismissed because the principle that you're bringing forward, the idea that you're bringing forward is too painful to be discussed. But when you're in that situation, it's extremely difficult to understand. There are many, many meetings where I sat down and I felt extremely deflated, very demotivated, something that I knew would have a negative impact. You've just launched one employee handbook, which says A, B, C, D, these are our values. And all of a sudden, when push comes to shove, we're discussing them at the table and we're not ready to put our money where our mouth is. And you know that when you're going to leave that room, if you don't take the decision that is necessary, that is painful, that is difficult, you're going to lose trust on the outside. So how do you do that? So these are the biggest issues. And when there are humans, you're always going to have these issues. How to ride the waves.
As you were talking, I remember this quote of Simon Sinek who says, if you don't know people, you don't know business. And then I would add, if you don't know yourself, you don't know people. So for me, I love the way you broke that down. And for me, the thread that runs through all of that is awareness. If we're going to be able to keep sane as HR professionals and even leaders of organizations who are constantly faced with these tough choices, we need awareness of the things that are pressuring us, of the vision that we have, and even just acknowledging how hard certain situations are makes them easier, even acknowledging that we find it hard to ask for help, even acknowledging that there aren't many spaces even for CEOs, right, to come together and support each other through the particular challenges of being a CEO. Same with HR professionals. For me, that thread, and maybe it's my self-development mindset, which always brings me back to that ultimate point of how do we become more aware? And I think this is a really kind of beautiful chance for us to just share a little bit more about how we're inspired really to support organizations to increase this awareness and equip themselves with the tools to be able to implement some of their own visions for the cultures that they want to create. I'm super inspired about the course that we're going to run together in February, which is specifically for HR professionals who are suffering from burnout or feel like that they might have a little bit too much stress on their plate. Mick, maybe you can share a little bit from your side. I mean, we're going to tag team in this, so we're going to be kind of coming at it from slightly different approaches. I feel like your approach is a little bit more strategic and helping HR professionals like really strategize how they can be most effective and how they can deal with some of their challenges. And also giving them a soundboard to bring in case studies and examples that sometimes you just need another ear and another person who's like, I get you, I've been in that exact situation. And then from my side, I'm bringing a little bit more of kind of the awareness practices, the meditation background, the self-development work to help HR professionals kind of look at their own patterns, look at their own emotions that are creating burnout and have a safe space to be able to unpack and interact with those. I don't know if there's anything you want to add on to that.
No, well, so to begin with, I think it's really linked to elevating the HR profession. You know, it's time to elevate the HR profession. And mostly leadership will not know how to elevate the HR profession. They could read it, they would have heard it in a seminar. In fact, you notice, if you go to HR seminars or HR conferences, you very, very rarely find leadership. You only find HR members, professionals. You very rarely find a CEO who's going to be listening to HR. They might listen to one talk, but the whole conference will generally be made up of HR professionals. So it's up to us to change the discourse. And it's up to us to elevate the profession. Now, how do we do it? So on my end, I guess it's a personal thing. It's what do I wish I had 10, 15 years ago when I actually started my HR journey? What do I wish I was told? How can I create the safe space for HR managers and HR professionals to recognize that it's okay to fail? It's okay to feel like this. It's okay if you know you're giving the right recommendation and the recommendation is not being taken on. That's no measure of success for you. How can we ensure that your motivation is still up, despite the fact that maybe once or twice you've been shot down? And that at the end of the day, you're not going to allow it to absorb and impact your identity. Who is the HR professional? And how can we create this safety of, strategy, safety of systems and processes, but also safety of people? And more importantly, how can we work with HR professionals to be a bit kinder to themselves? I think kindness is a very, very important thing because we are not that kind to ourselves. We spend our lives giving, as you said, your weekends are worrying about this. I mean, many times have I had to jump into my car and actually drive to a member of staff's house myself. And it drains you. It really, really does drain you because what you do is you absorb other people's problems. So how are we going to find that balance? And acknowledge that it's a tough business, but it's also a very, very, very rewarding one.
Beautiful. I'm really excited, Mick, to co-host this with you and bring our different backgrounds in and also really curious, for the different human beings that are going to resonate with this call, because that's also going to be a big part of that, right? Like the different characters and backgrounds of the group that we're going to create. And I also really want to build a community, right? Because I think, as you said, like support from our peers who really understand what it means to be in some of these situations, I think is a really big source of support. And I'm all for creating communities with people who are on similar journeys to us in many different spheres.
I think we both agree that we've been quite stunned at the amount of response that we've received, even in conversation, or, I gave a talk recently on the subject, and the way people resonate. And you can see it in people's smiles. As we give demonstrations, for example, for Insights, you can see people, I can read their organization within 5 minutes. And the minute I start pinpointing certain things that reflect the culture of the organization, you can see people's expressions change. It's quite extraordinary. It's really exciting. It's like a game, but it's really, really exciting because what it does is it gives you data. It gives you information to be able to make change, to be effective in your job. And that's fun. It's great. It's a great satisfaction to be able to, this is the red flag. So this is where I'm going to focus for this month. Not just firefighting, but actually with an aim. And what it does is it empowers human resource professionals to actually believe in themselves more.
And this is probably a good point to mention that after this course that we're going to be running specifically for burnout in HR, we're going to be doing a lot of other courses which actually address these issues of, okay, the data has shown me the red flag. What now? How do I address these issues? So, we're going to be launching a lot of different services that actually enable us to support in actually tackling these issues. And sometimes it's actually really incredible to have a sounding board from someone outside of your organization who can really reflect to you, free of the emotional attachments to the different characters in the story, but actually really reflect to you some wisdom from the outside. So
I mean, what's great is, it's true, I spent a long time as an HR frontliner. And it's a tough job. It's a really, really tough job. And now I'm looking at it from another side. So I sometimes still do frontline HR, but as a consultant rather than as a frontliner within the organization itself. And there is a huge benefit of having someone from the outside looking in. Because what it does is it gives you a certain veneer of objectivity in people's perceptions, that you're not in the organization juggling and jostling for political power. Yeah. And when that is removed in people's minds, you receive much more feedback.
You get more trust, right? If you don't have emotional attachment. Exactly. I see this even, in some of the assistance that you gave me when I started my role, and your sort of perspective on certain things being outside of the organization at that time really helped me see things through a completely different lens. So yeah, I'm really, really excited for that. And the last thing I feel it would be really important to mention is that we're going to be holding a conference in March. So
very exciting.
This is something that I've been passionate about for a long time, because I really believe in the power of conferences. I love to be inspired. I think that's my modus operandi.
You're a conference junkie,
I am.
I have to say.
For the right conferences, right? Because
yes.
It's actually also super disappointing when you go to a conference and you want to be inspired and you're left kind of not feeling so inspired. But it is a huge investment in our time, right? When we take especially, full days or even half days, like that's a huge investment of our time. We want to get something back for that. So I'm really kind of excited. We're still cooking up, the recipe of exactly what this conference is going to entail. But we're bringing down a really inspirational speaker from the UK who's going to be talking a lot about performance and the way that we create organizational culture, especially coming through the lens of positive reinforcement, especially during performance reviews and so on. He's also going to be giving some really beautiful messages on diversity and inclusion, which studies were just released this week that show that a third of our workforce is now coming from non-Maltese nationals. So this is a really hot topic, I feel, for organizations of how do we integrate people into our culture? How do we celebrate diversity and make sure people feel included and feel, going back to, our workplace being a sort of community, how do we create the sense of belonging and trust within our organization? So also really excited for him and the message that he's going to be sharing. So we'll post some links to that conference in the description. And we hope to bring some really inspirational ideas about, again, not just HR is important, people are important, but how do we create exceptional culture?
And our roles in the creation of exceptional culture.
Yeah.
So that's it's very exciting. It's really exciting to see, how one can evolve and take the difficulties of HR to a completely different level where we can be inspired and we can inspire each other. So, the mundane part of the job is the mundane part of the job. That's why we have systems, like sharpened systems, to be able to take the mundane out of our daily tasks. But when you look behind the tasks and actually understand the human beings, then it's not rocket science. Because people's needs are very, very, very similar. We just have to understand them and work with them. Only recently I was speaking to a colleague of mine and actually said it would be really interesting for me to understand your need. And you'd be surprised how many people don't understand their needs. Yeah. What are you trying to achieve? We've spent so much time thinking that, titles and advancement in our career and the way people look at us and what position we have in society and what car we drive, what house we have, that's what makes us. We forget that actually it doesn't. And really what we need is something completely different. And this is where I say HR learn how to identify those needs in people. And that's the beauty of it. When we were working on the restructuring at Scheiben, I remember turning around to Yaz and saying, this individual and this individual would be perfect for these positions. And I got these looks, no. And I'm like, yes, and this is why I think so. And the perspective of an outsider coming in meant that I recognized aspects of leadership that were possibly not seen before. And it worked really, really, really well,
Yeah, I'm super excited just in general for 2024. I feel like the HR space is so ripe for new ideas, and our understanding of organizational culture is really shifting. And I feel like there's a real openness to, even though we have our struggles and there's like a light and shadow in every situation. And yeah, there is the shadow of the struggles and the burnout but I see also such a potential, and I feel very privileged to be in a situation where, so many clients trust Scheiben and the solutions we've developed, and our track record of, putting a lot of attention and love towards our clients has created that trust. And I feel like this next step is also going to help us to really use our relationships and the trust that clients have placed in us to be able to offer a perspective on HR that's really going to help cultures flourish. And I think, we've both been involved in the design of our performance management modules and our offboarding and onboarding and skills certifications and training modules. It's been really beautiful to come with this perspective. Okay, software also affects our culture. There are things that we've put into the design of the software to help make cultures better and to help HR professionals. So for me, it's like, wow, what an opportunity to be able to combine the software element, making the systems and the structures which so much form the foundation of our organizations, and now adding in this element of, okay, how do we also give ourselves the soft skills that work in collaboration with the software to help us create exceptional workplaces. So super excited, Mick,
Very
to
excited.
also have you, as a partner on this journey to bring our skill sets into organizations in collaboration with the Scheiben team. I don't know if you have any final words.
It's been, life with Yaz is always exciting. So she challenges me. She's put up a mirror to me. It hasn't been easy, but what it has done, it has created symbiosis and really created an environment where we can come together and use our skill sets to make a change and to make an impact. And I must say, at the beginning, when I started working with Scheiben, I was a bit wary of, software and what it can bring and how much added value it can bring. But I say that it's been one hell of an experience working with the developers and working with Yaz and also the extended team to actually understand how we can best use software to change people's lives and to make it better. And one of the principles and concepts that I've learned from the team has been to fail fast. And it's a fantastic concept because it's not one we really enjoy. So, failure is something that Yaz and I work with people a lot about, and our fear of failure. But developers don't have a fear of failure. They fail so often in their job. Their code fails so often that it's kind of something that is normal for them to fail and go on to the next one. Even if they've been working on it for days on end, even if they've been working on a product for months, they're very, very quick to recognize when it fails, draw the line and move on. And, how can we take that and use it also in our day-to-day to be able to avoid burnout, to be able to be kinder to ourselves? So it's just been a very, very interesting journey, and one that is set to get even more interesting in 2024, not just with the launches of new products to really assist our clients with their day-to-day and with their culture, but also with courses, with the conferences that we're planning, and with our general day-to-day availability for people to, just have a chat and look at things from a different perspective and learn from the many, many, many failures that I've had and are not scared to speak about.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Mick, for your time. I don't think this is going to be the last podcast that we're recording because HR is such a deep topic. And I know our performance management module is due to be released very soon. So I mean, this is a topic that really fascinates me, the way that we deal with performance reviews. So I want to sit down with you and even just dive into that as a topic. But for now, that's it. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you to everyone for listening, and stay tuned because we're going to have quite a few more episodes coming over this year that will interest especially people within HR, but also within leaderships of organizations, always around the center point of our passion for people. But we're going to be looking at it even, with some of our developers taking a really different approach to this same passion for people that we have. And 2024 is going to be really themed around happiness as the new productivity, and how we as an organization can support you in creating happier, more effective organizations.
Thank you.
Thank you.